My name is Norman Willis. Welcome to part 1 of Revelation of the End Times. In this series, we're going to take an in-depth look at the book of the Revelation. In this part 1, we'll discuss the 7 seals of Revelation and the 144,000. The timeline begins with Seal 1. The seals are going to introduce a cast of characters, and these are spiritual forces that are going to conflict with each other here on earth, setting the stage. The first 4 seals introduce a horse of a different color, and these horses represent spirits. These same 4 horses show up in Zechariah also, so we're going to look at Zechariah first. In Zechariah, the red horse represents communism, socialism, democracy, or we might call it populism. We'll see more about that later. The black horse represents central banking. Examples of this might be the United States Federal Reserve, the International Monetary Fund, the Bilderbergs, or the Rothschilds. The white horse basically represents Roman Catholicism. It might also represent the ecumenical movement, which is the move by the Roman Catholic Church to bring all the Protestant churches back in under the Pope. And the green horse represents Islam and Islamic terror. In Zechariah chapter 6, starting in verse 1, we read, "Then I turned and raised my eyes and looked, and behold, 4 chariots were coming from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of bronze. With the first chariot were red horses, representing populism. With the second chariot, black horses, representing central banking. With the third chariot, white horses, representing Catholicism, and with the 4th chariot, dappled horses, representing Islam. They are all strong steeds. Then I answered and said to the messenger who talked with me, 'What are these, my master?' And the messenger answered and said to me, 'These are 4 spirits of heaven, which go out from their station before the master of all the earth.'" Verse 6. "The one with the black horses, representing capitalism, is going to the north country," which, as we'll see later, represents Protestant northwestern Europe and her colonies. "And the white horses, representing the church, are going after them. And the dappled, representing Islam, are going towards the south country." Then the strong steeds went out, eager to go, that they might walk to and fro throughout the earth. And he said, "Go, walk to and fro throughout the earth." So they walked to and fro throughout the earth. And he called to me and spoke to me, saying, "See, those who go towards the north country," meaning capitalism and Christianity, "have given rest to my spirit in the north country," meaning Protestant northwestern Europe and her colonies. Now we should take notice that the black and the white steeds went to the north country, representing Protestant northwestern Europe and later her colonies, Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, and the like. Now, as we see this happening historically, first the Roman legions went north in order to expand the Roman Empire, and then they brought their religion with them. Basically, the Catholic Church followed. In other words, first the imperialists went out looking for money and wealth, and the Catholics followed after them. Now, very interestingly, Yahweh said this gave rest to his spirit. What we're going to see in the book of the Revelation is we'll see the same 4 horses, only the order is going to be different. The white horse is going to represent the church, again, which goes after the black horses. The red, again, is communism, socialism, or populism, democracy. The black is going to represent central banking, and the dappled, pale, or green horses are going to be associated with Islam, or otherwise known as submission to the will of the Spirit. Now, if we want to have some fun and be completely politically incorrect, we might say, sort of tongue-in-cheek, that the white represents Catholicism, the red represents populism or democracy, the black represents Judaism, and the dappled, pale, or green represent Islam. Revelation 6 and verse 1. "Now I saw that when the Lamb," remembering the Lamb is Yeshua, it's very interesting, it's the Lamb that opens the seals. "Now when I saw that the Lamb opened one of the seals, And I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he went out, conquering and to conquer. We might take a look and see that the Pope dresses in white. And historically, Rome's armies have gone forth, conquering and to conquer. We're going to see that Yeshua also rides a white horse when he comes at the Battle of Armageddon in Revelation chapter 19, verse 11. But this first horse is not Yeshua's horse. This has to be the anti-Messiah's horse, because he goes out conquering and to conquer. Revelation 6 and verse 3. And when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come and see." And another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. And as we take a look around the world where we've had red movements, communism, both in communist Russia and also in communist China, they use red as their primary symbol, and peace is taken from the earth. Wherever Marxism, communism, or populism is, eventually there's violence, because the emphasis becomes on the will of the people and not on the will of Elohim, or God, which is what brings peace. As we see in the Torah government study, Yahweh's model is a kingship model, but populism ignores that. Verse 5. When he'd opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." And so I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures, saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." Now, in the black horse's world, everything has a price tag on it. Remembering that this is central banking. We might say the Rothschilds, the Bilderbergers, the International Monetary Fund, the Bohemian Grove, the Federal Reserve. All these people have what might be described as hearts as black as coal. They're not using their money in support of Yahweh or Yahweh's people. They're using these funds for secular purposes, for their own ends. Revelation chapter 6 and verse 7. And when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a green horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. And Islam covers about a fourth of the earth. The King James translators used the word pale for the fourth horse, yet in Greek the word is chloros. Chloros is the same word that the word chlorophyll comes from, and this is what makes plants green. Now it's interesting to note that the tribulation colors we've seen, red, white, black, and green, show up in almost all of the Islamic nations' flags. For example, here's the Palestinian flag, red, white, black, and green. Take a look at the Jordanian flag. We might see some similarities, red, white, black, and green. Here's the Kuwaiti flag. Are we starting to see a pattern here? Red, white, black, and green. Here's the Syrian flag. Does anyone see a pattern? Red, white, black, and green. And here's the Afghani flag. Red, white, black, and green. Now, green is the predominant color. For example, here's the Al Jazeera flag. And some people sort of notice there's a certain color, a certain specific shade of green. This is a Hamas head or an armband, and the green predominates. Again, here's a Hamas headband with the green predominating. So what we see here in these first 4 seals is we see forces being released. Basically, the stage is being set for a big drama that's been playing out now for hundreds of years, and it's going to come to the climax or the crisis point. And as the plot builds, we're going to come to seal 5, which is where we may be right now. At the 5th seal, Yahweh's martyrs cry out. And there's been lots of martyrs in Israel in the past. And the martyrs are told that more people will have to die before Yahweh will judge their cause and establish justice. Verse 9, when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of Elohim and for the testimony which they held. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, Yahweh, set apart and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And then a robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren, who would be killed as they were, or would be killed as they had been, was completed. And we're going to see later that the number of their brethren who would be killed as they were, is going to be what we'll see later is the great multitude dressed in white that comes out of the Great Tribulation. My belief, my personal interpretation, study it out for yourself, come to your own conclusion, is that we are here at this fifth seal. And the reason why I say that is we are able to see historically what's happened in the past at seals 1 through 4. Seal 6, we haven't seen that yet. We're going to see seal 6 is still a future event. Up until now, we've just been setting the stage. Revelation has been introducing the cast of characters. But what we're going to see is that at seal 6, things begin to break loose. We're going to see perhaps a nuclear exchange in the Middle East, maybe even also some action in America. What's going to change, what's going to bring about all the drama, is that Yahweh, as we explained in the Nazarene Israel study, Yahweh has established what we might call the old world order. Yahweh established one Jewish nation, many Christian nations, and also 12 predominantly Islamic nations. Now the Christian and Islamic nations have fought with each other for over 1,000 years. What the Crusades was all about, and the 9/11 disaster, all these sorts of things. These are all the struggle between Christianity and Islam in Yahweh's old world order. Now we talk about the new world order. There are certain people who don't believe in Yahweh. Some people call them globalists, others calls them liberals. But these globalist peoples want to do away with the concept of sovereign Christian and Islamic states. They want to bring about a secular new world order with a one world government. The reason why they want to bring about global government is they hope that this will avoid nuclear war. Many Christians, Jews, and Muslims would support a global government if they thought it could be avoiding a nuclear war. But so now, what would happen if, this is just a hypothetical scenario, just painting a picture for you, and you take it in and pray about it and see what you think. See how he leads you. But what would happen if there was a nuclear crisis in the Middle East? And what if the United Nations asked the Pope to step in and broker a peace deal? What if the reason the Pope could broker a peace deal between the Catholic and the Islamic world is because of his long-standing ties with Islam? What if the Pope has such close ties with Islam that the Pope has even kissed the Quran and has made claims that Islam is also a faith that leads to salvation? What if the UN then turned Jerusalem into an international city and asked the Pope to move his throne to Jerusalem? And what if the Pope was then asked to set up an interfaith temple in Jerusalem with the outer courtyard open to all the Gentile religions of the world? And then what if the world's political leaders then hailed the Pope as a hero for bringing about religious unity and the peace and safety that comes thereof? Would this scenario fulfill 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting in verse 3, where we're told, "Do not let anyone deceive you in any way, because that day will not come unless first comes the falling away, and the man of sin," we might say the man of lawlessness, is revealed, the son of perdition, the one opposing and exalting himself over everything being called Elohim, or object of worship, so as for him to sit in the temple of Elohim as Elohim, showing himself that he is Elohim. Might it also fulfill Revelation chapter 11 and verse 2, which we'll see later, which says, "But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the set-apart city underfoot for 42 months." If such an interfaith temple is built, and the outer courtyard is open to all, the UN might also open up the land of Israel to immigration to people of all faiths, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whoever. And if that happens, there may be what we'll explain later, there may be an early ingathering back to the land of Israel. If this is the case, it should be safe to go to the land of Israel temporarily, just so long as we're sure to leave when the abomination of desolation is set up. And we'll talk more about that later on in this presentation. Now, revelation is a vision. At what level do we interpret visions? We can interpret them at the physical level, or we can interpret them at the spiritual level. Or some say we could interpret them at both. I'm going to make the suggestion that because it's a vision, that we interpret it primarily at the spiritual level, with the understanding that there are manifestations of it here in the physical level. I think that's the safest way to understand a vision. In Revelation 6 and verse 12, it says, "I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake." I believe this great earthquake is symbolic of societal unrest, basically a social groundquake kind of a thing. We'll talk about that more in a moment. "And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood." If we understand this at the spiritual level, what we might think is that the sun is symbolic of Yeshua's Spirit, which lights our path and shows us the way. The moon could be symbolic at one level of how the Torah or the law or how the scriptures light our path. Now, we can certainly walk by the light of Scripture. And in fact, Psalm 119 and verse 105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." So you can definitely walk by the light of the moon, just as you can definitely walk by reading Scripture and then trying to do what it says. But how much easier is it when we're saved, when we accept Yeshua the Messiah as our personal Savior, and we're filled with His Spirit, and we let it rule in us and reign in us and over us, and when we let it guide our steps, how much easier is it to walk in the light of Yeshua's Spirit, in the light of the sun, so to speak, than it is to walk by the light of the moon. Well, if we understand these things, in the occult, the black sun is a symbol of an ancient Roman swastika, and it represents a rise of Roman power. So if we take a look at these things at the spiritual level now, the sun could be seen as being symbolic of Yeshua's Spirit. At another level, an even deeper level, we might interpret this as being symbolic of the church. It might be a mystery, so to speak. And the moon might be symbolic of the Torah or also the laws of Moses. If we take a look at a deeper level, it might be symbolic of Judaism. So now when we read in the book of Revelation that the sun and the moon are darkened, it may mean that the Roman Church comes to full power and starts teaching a corrupted doctrine, and Judaism also is in collusion with the Roman Church and teaches against the law or the Torah of Moses. And we'll see more about that as the presentation progresses. But take a look at the parallels here. I said that Revelation provides a timeline into which all the other end-time prophecies plug in. Revelation 6 and verse 12 says, "And when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood." Joel 2 and verse 31, speaking of the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh in the end times, says, "And the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh." We'll talk about that more as the study progresses. Revelation 6 and verse 13 says, "And then the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind." Again, we need to understand this at two different levels. At the spiritual level, This is probably demons coming to earth. And these demons would be unleashed, if we interpret this at the physical level, by the after effect of certain nukes. So we see a parallelism. The primarily is in the spiritual, but there's a reflection of the spiritual here in the shadow picture on earth, in the physical, in the material. Revelation 6 and verse 12, it says, "Then the sky receded as a scroll when it's rolled up." This could be a reference to a nuclear exchange. It says, "And every mountain and island was moved out of its place." What we're going to see, let me suggest to you, and you just take it in and see how it fits. Let me suggest that possibly one solution could be that mountains are symbolic of governments and islands are symbolic of national boundaries. And the reason the mountains and the islands all move is because Yahweh's old world order of sovereign nations is collapsing, and the United Nations is now establishing a one world government. All of the borders and all of the governments are going to move because the one world government is being set up. Verse 15, "And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, 'Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?'" At the vision, at the spiritual level, the earthquake is a shake-up in the social order, which would happen if you had a one-world government coming to power. When the old national boundaries, when the old markers, the old governments are falling down and a new government is being set up, it's going to create a lot of social turbulence and a lot of social turmoil. It's going to create a shaking in a sense, and we're going to see more about that word as time goes on. Now we're going to talk about the 144,000, which is an inset chapter. Revelation chapter 7, starting in verse 1. "After these things I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living Elohim. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, 'Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our Elohim on their foreheads.' And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed." What we see is the sealing of the 144,000, this is going to protect them from harm during the trumpets or the Great Tribulation. Now we also saw earlier that there's a great multitude dressed in white, which we saw earlier at Seal 5. These do not survive the tribulation. And this fulfills what we saw earlier, how Yahweh said that more had to die before he would avenge the blood of his servants, the martyrs. Revelation 7 and verse 9. "And after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, 'Salvation belongs to our Elohim, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.' Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, 'Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from?' And I said to him, 'O Master, you know.' So he said to me, 'These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of Elohim, and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more, nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them, and lead them to living fountains of waters. And Elohim will wipe away every tear from their eyes." In the natural, we might think it's very sad that believers in every country are going to die in the Great Tribulation or the Great Distress. But the spiritual reality is that this is actually a happy thing, because they get to go be with Yahweh sooner than we do. And the apostle Shaul or Paul said that to die was gain, because we get to go be with Yeshua sooner. Most of us fear death, but in a sense, we win either way. Either we get to go be with Yeshua sooner, and we don't have to experience all the mess that's going to happen on earth during the Great Tribulation. Or we have to experience the mess of the Great Tribulation, but we get more time to serve Yeshua and to serve our fellow man. So we win either way. We just need to maintain the right positive perspective. At Seal 7, we're going to see a half an hour's pause while the New World Order is set up following the nuclear exchange in the Middle East, and a new generation is raised up to serve and worship the Pope. Revelation chapter 8, starting in verse 1, says, "When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour." We've got two main options here. One is that this is a non-specific amount of time. Basically, this half hour just means a while. This is an entirely possible interpretation, could very well be. The second option is that this represents a specific amount of time. If it represents a specific, literal, definite amount of time, either it can be a literal half hour, which is unlikely. It can represent, or if we use the principle of a day for a year, it could represent 7.5 days. If we use the principle of 1 day for 1,000 years, it would represent 20.83 years. Now, option C makes a lot of sense because it's going to take longer than 7.5 days for the nuclear fallout from Seal 6 to settle and for the conflict in the Middle East to come to a close. But that's not definitive. It could be any of those possibilities. But now, just considering option C, if there are 20.83 years in between Seal 6 and the opening of the trumpets in the Great Tribulation, what this would mean is that an entire generation of children would have time to grow up being taught that fundamental religious belief is bad, and that Yahweh's old world order is bad, and that the only way nuclear war could be avoided was by placing the Pope on the Temple Mount and hosting an interfaith temple. This is perfectly consistent with what the world wants to teach our children, which is that fundamental religious belief is bad, because fundamental religious belief leads to war between Christians and Muslims, and that only a compromise between the religions can lead to lasting world peace. That is no peace. So after the half an hour of silence at Seal 7, however long that half an hour of silence is, the trumpets will open, which we'll talk about in part 2. Hope you join me there.